Welcome to Glass Half Full with Leslie Krongold. She shares her stories, experiences, and knowledge of living and coping with a chronic health condition. Learn about tools and resources and hear inspirational interviews that help you to live a life filled with quality and dignity. With 2 decades of support group leadership, Leslie's ready to help you make lemonade out of life's lemons. Are you ready?
Some say love is a drug. I say yoga is my drug of choice. No disrespect for the power of love, but my practice of yoga is pretty darn powerful, impacting my mind, body, and spirit. Actually, my current treatment is more like the cocktail, a medical regimen that includes a combination of several drugs so that their combined effect is more potent than that of any of the individual drugs. And yoga is one of the main ingredients in my cocktail. My guest for today's podcast is not someone with a chronic health condition. My guest is JoAnn Lyons, a yoga teacher here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We met several years ago when she did a presentation and class at my support group meeting. JoAnn's specialty, shall we say, is teaching yoga to people with disabilities, as well as training other yoga teachers to work with people with disabilities. Before I share our conversation with you, I want to go over some basics. In fact, I urge you to visit the Glass Half Full website to read the podcast show notes. JoAnn talks about several different types of yoga: Iyengar, integral, Vedanta, and Sivananda. I have links for them in the show notes, but it's not important to understand the differences between the 4 types of yoga. Basically, the big takeaway is yoga is much more than a form of exercise. You don't have to bend over backwards to have a yoga practice. I've never been able to do many of the classic yoga poses like a head or handstand. JoAnn talks about chair yoga, and that's just what it is. It's doing yoga while seated in a chair or a wheelchair. Many years ago, she started working with people with cerebral palsy at the CP Center in Oakland, California. That organization is now called Ability Now Bay Area, and she refers to it both ways, CP Center, Ability Now Bay Area, but it's the same organization she's been affiliated with for years. The other organization JoAnn mentions is the Piedmont Yoga Community, which is also here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It used to be just a Piedmont Yoga in a studio, but it's sort of broken through the walls of a building, and the concept takes place at many different locations. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to making yoga accessible to people with challenges and empowering them to develop a healthy mind, body, and spirit in a safe environment. I've known you for a long time, and I was trying to remember how I first heard about you. And I think it was at the support group, someone told me there are classes for people with disabilities at this Piedmont Yoga. I called around, and I remember getting in touch with you before I'd even met you and asked you if you could come to the support group. And you've always been so generous with your time and, coming to the support groups, because over 17 years, I think you must have been there at least 3 times, if not more.
I was going to say at least 3 or 4, yeah. I always enjoy that, and I always hope that somebody will show up from the group, and I've never seen anybody come to classes. I know how difficult it is. My hope when I present at your group is that they will begin to trust, because I know that's the issue. But I think that word of mouth is really the easiest way to, or the best and only way to get people coming to that class. It's just word of mouth. So somebody who comes says, oh, you should try this, you should go with me, or something like that. But just to go on your own, I think it's too daunting somehow.
Is that how a lot of people end up? They come with a friend?
Mm-hmm.
So
or somebody has recommended it and they try it. Students are all very warm and welcoming, so that's good too. Mm-hmm. It's we get a little crazy every now and then, but it's a nice community, and that's one of the things. We actually had a mutual friend just did a focus group, and found that the community is really high on the list of why everyone comes to that class, because of the bonds that have formed and just the social.
It's interesting that's important for me going to any yoga class. I mean, well, of course, it has to be gentle yoga, but, you know, a lot of people say, why don't you do your own home practice? Part of it is just being part of that group vibe and and the social network that also happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same for everyone, and so, but I think it's even more important to the folks with disabilities, because a lot of them don't get out in other ways, and so that's something that, you know, every week we're there, and I have a great and wonderful group of people who assist at these classes, volunteers and paid assistants, and people who come in as interns after they've done a workshop with me, and it's just, like I say, everybody's warm and welcoming, and it's just everybody feels seen, heard, and supported at the classes, so I think it's great.
You've been doing yoga over 30 years, right?
Try 40.
40? Gee, I wonder if the last time I asked you was about 10 years ago.
Probably.
Okay, and so what drew you to yoga? Do you remember... No, when you say 40 years ago, do you mean practicing or a teacher?
That was when I first started taking yoga classes, was over 40 years ago in Indiana.
Okay.
And I had an amazing teacher up there. I was very lucky. There was a lady named Lori Collins in Indiana who, she had done a training with the Sivananda group. She did that training, and then she came back and started teaching. And in the meantime, when I started taking classes with her, she had gone to India and studied with BKS Iyengar. And so she got certified by Iyengar ultimately. So I have a little bit of those two kinds of backgrounds behind me. But the way I started, this is almost embarrassing. There were several women who had kids of the same age, little kids, and we had a wonderful place where we would take our kids swimming every day during the summertime. It was our social group and what we were doing. So this friend of mine who had gone to a yoga class the night before said, "Oh, you should go." And I was like, well, what is it? I'd never even heard of yoga. It's Indiana, right? I never heard of yoga. And so she starts telling me a little bit about it. And then she says, this was the clincher, she said, and the teacher is probably 10 years older than us, and she looks 10 years younger. And I was like, okay, I'll buy that. So I went to a class, and the first class, I knew I was home. It just was right. It was right for my body. It was just what I loved doing. And so just started going to classes with her, studied with her for probably about 3 years up there, and then had to get some life things out of the way, and ended up in Florida and contacted her when I decided, I was about 45, I think, when I decided I really should be a yoga teacher when I grew up. I was getting kind of tired of saying I don't know what I want to be. So anyway, I contacted her and wrote her a letter and said, you were one of the most influential people in my life. And I know she looked at that letter and went, who? JoAnn, who? So it turns out we reconnected, and we've been friends ever since. I just talked to her a couple of weeks ago, and she is wonderful. She's been a real inspiration to me over the years. But I studied with some people down in Florida, Bobby Golden, Sam Dworkis, and there wasn't much in the area where I was, so I did a little bit of teaching there, started actually teaching there, and then knew that I really had to get serious about it and had to get some serious training. So I'd been thinking that the Iyengar Institute out here in San Francisco was where I was going to come, but I really didn't want to do 2 years. And I heard about this teacher training that Rodney Yee was doing for 1 year. And I thought, oh, I can do a year. And so I quit my job and packed my dog and my cat in the car and drove across the country to Oakland to be here for that year of teacher training for 1 year. And that was 20 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how I got into yoga, and that's how I got into teaching.
Okay. So when did you focus on people with special needs?
Well, it's interesting. That was never in my mind. I mean, I don't know anyone, never had anyone in the family with special needs that I knew of at that time. And so it was the middle of the teacher training year that Rodney came to our class and said that Maureen Burnt, who is at the CP Center, she's the head of the wellness program there, she said that wouldn't it be great to have yoga classes at the CP Center? That's what it was called then. And Rod said, so if anybody wants to start a class. So a couple of other guys and I decided that we would try it. And I still remember walking in the first day, and my thought was, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Because I had never seen a level of disability that I saw at the CP Center, and having not been around disability at all. So we went through a year just kind of team teaching and just kind of seeing what happened. And at the end of a year, everybody else decided that they were done. That was all they were going to do. And I couldn't give it up because I felt it was really helping some of the people there. The wellness program, there at Ability now, has picked up. They have Feldenkrais, they have massage, they have a lot of other disciplines there, Jinshin-jitsu. And so those are all available to participants at the CP Center. And it's grown from that one struggling, crazy class that we had to 5 classes now a week. So there's a couple of classes that are chair classes. There's a couple of classes where people get out of their chairs if they want to. And then there's a philosophy class that we started. It's just been kind of interesting. That's where we are now.
So when you were doing that with these other colleagues, were you all aware of this being done anywhere else in the country? I mean, yoga therapy wasn't really a term, right?
No, that's new, along with a lot of other stuff that's new about yoga. No, I have to say that it was really pretty much something that nobody had done or thought about, and I had no knowledge of any way to do anything. I just kind of taught yoga and said, well, what can they do of each yoga pose, and that was where we went from there. So, but I realized very quickly after that first and second, or the second and third years, that I really needed some teachers who were well-trained teachers, yoga teachers, and then well-trained in the art of teaching people with disabilities. And so I started teaching a workshop through the Piedmont Yoga Studio program, teacher training program. And I got some of the people who are still there helping me and assisting at the CP Center today, Baxter Bell, Lynn Maxwell, Patty Hirota Cohen did it for a long time. And we've had a lot of people who've come through and then have moved away, who've been wonderful help, and people who are, like I say, still there. So it's always in flux, and it's always a challenge. But the people who are there, the assistants and the teachers who are there, are really dedicated to this. It's really lovely, and they like me feel that we get more out of it than we put in.
So, what sort of changes have you seen? What sold you on working with the folks with CP? What kind of changes did you see? Were they just physical? Were they emotional?
I think at first it was probably more the physical stuff that I saw. I remember one student, and I have to say that I know that this person took Feldenkrais or had Feldenkrais as well. And the combination of those two things, I watched this person go from someone who was very withdrawn and very inward, physically as well as emotionally. And I watched this person start to reach out to other people, to talk to other people, just to say hello to them in the hallways. And it got to the point where some of the counselors there said, can you tamper down just a little bit, But it was lovely to see that, knowing that it was the physical, the movement that she could do. She would come in and I'd say, what do you want to do? And she'd say downward facing dog, and she'd get all of her props, put them all up and do downward facing dog. It was lovely. It was really lovely. So the physical was kind of the first, but the emotional follows, or it might be emotional and then some physical. I have another person who was coming to the chair class, and a very bright person who, he was in the chair class and kind of just going along with it and not, it was like, okay, I show up, I'm supposed to be here. And then we started the philosophy class, and all of a sudden it made a difference to him, understanding what we were doing, why we were doing it, and so that changed his physical participation in the class too. It's just really, it's very fascinating, isn't it?
Do you think he was just thinking of it as an exercise class?
Yeah.
He didn't have a concept of what,
of the broader scope of yoga. Yeah.
Yeah, so many people don't.
Well, and unfortunately, a lot of yoga today is just an exercise class, but we don't want to go there particularly.
Right. There's so much yoga.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start to connect with people outside of the Bay Area, knowing that they were doing something similar to what you're doing?
Well, I mean, there are, I guess it has to go back to a workshop that the MS Society presented with Eric Small. And he came, I guess I should say who Eric Small is. He's an Iyengar certified teacher who's about my age now when he was here then, so he's older now. Well, he has an interesting story. He also has a book, and he went around to different MS societies and different areas. He's from LA, I believe, in that area, Southern California somewhere. But he would offer these trainings for teachers. And I met a couple of other teachers who are here in the Bay Area. Jivana Heyman, who is no longer here, he's now down in Southern California, but he was here with the Integral Yoga system. And he actually started a teacher training for people with disabilities, who have disabilities. And Saraswati, who is up in Berkeley, and still teaching at Cal State and or Cal Star.
That's a woman, right?
Yes.
Oh, I took a class of hers.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So the three of us, and I know there were at least 2 or 3 other people there who came to that workshop. And Eric really, he kind of confirmed for me what I was doing was what I could do and what I needed to be doing. There were a lot of people there, a lot of people who showed up. So I think, and I still think this, that instead of classes that are available for people with disabilities, a lot of yoga teachers have chosen to work one-on-one with people with a disability somehow, somewhere. And, places like the CP Center, Clausen House here in Oakland, we also provide classes there. When I say we, that's Piedmont Yoga Community, the nonprofit that supports some of my classes in Piedmont.
And those are classes for people with developmental disabilities.
Yes. Clausen House is a day program. Piedmont Yoga Community approached them. I had one of the teachers who works with me at the CP Center. I knew she had taught there years ago, and I knew they had the props, and they had a bunch of people, and they had a place. And so we said, well, if we provide you with a teacher, would you like classes? And they would love to add another class at Clausen House. There's just not enough funding for it. It's, like I say, the funding and the money is just, it dried up a few years ago for that sort of thing. And so it's not gotten better, it's gotten worse.
And yet, yoga is happening in more places than you can possibly imagine, different corporate environments, hospitals.
Yeah. Right? I would love to see somehow the yoga community itself get together and start to help provide those kind of classes, because if you do the math on a good-sized yoga room, people with wheelchairs, even if only 2 or 3 of the people have a wheelchair, you've got to have that space for the wheelchair. There has to be space for all the assistants and possibly an attendant or 2 if someone brings their attendant with them. And all the props, of course, me and my props. There's no way to sustain that without extra funding from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so Yogadana Foundation has been the savior for places like Ability Now and for the Piedmont Yoga Community. They have funded or helped to fund these classes. So
it's a local foundation?
Yogadana Foundation grew out, it's the foundation that grew out of the California Yoga Teachers Association. from years ago. And so they have some funds that they give out, donate, or that they use for grants every year, twice a year.
What I've done when I go to different conferences for my disease is I've tried to identify a yoga teacher, yoga therapist in that town from the IAYT, was that International Association Yoga Therapy website. Are there other clearinghouses, so to speak? Because that's been, I'll talk to people about yoga, and, they're from all over, and they just, the Bay Area, we're just so fortunate.
Mm-hmm. We are. There's the, Jivana Heyman, whom I was talking about a while ago, he started the first accessible yoga conference last year down in Santa Barbara. And it was well attended. It was very lovely. I did a presentation for him last year on transferring people from wheelchairs to the floor and back again. And that they're doing it again this year, so it's become a regular thing. Matthew Sanford, who is fairly well known now in the yoga world, and is an Iyengar instructor. He was the keynote speaker. Thank you, keynote speaker that night. And so it was very lovely to see a lot of these people together, people who had disabilities and people who don't, but teach to people with disabilities, and the variety of disabilities and the knowledge that was there. So that's through the Accessible Yoga Conferences, basically the brainchild of Jivana and the integral yoga system. So integral yoga is big in this kind of teaching. In America here, we've blended it all like we do everything else. And so, or I think should. Do I dare go there? Anyway, it's much more, you see a lot of the Iyengar system within the integral system, and you see the integral system and the Sivananda system and, all of them, the Vedanta. There's a lot of different styles of yoga, but they, like I say, they have somewhat blended. Mm-hmm. At this point in time.
Well, I go to yoga classes where they've got some Pilates, they've got some Qigong.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like it as long as the teacher is doing it correctly and it feels authentic, because we have a lot of influences.
Well, I think, I think yoga is just growing and changing. It's, America took it on and over 100 years ago now, and we've just made it our own kind of thing. But there were people at this conference, at the Accessible Yoga Conference last year, from Germany and China, and there were people from all over, and they are aware of all of this, the different kinds and the different. So our influence here in America has spread. And, the retreat centers that we have everywhere, that was something that was started by the Sivananda system. He there's one in Grass Valley out here in California. There's one in the Bahamas, one in Val Moran, Canada.
But, none of them are really adaptive or accessible.
No.
Even the Yoga Journal Conference, I'm shocked how little they have available with their multiple tracks, over 4 days. But you have Rodney Yee going there and talking about the importance of yoga therapy and the importance of getting yoga into hospitals. But every year that I went maybe 4 years, I would write, in the feedback, do a track for people with disabilities. Mm.
No, it's not something that Yoga Journal appears to be interested in. Let's put it that way.
They wouldn't put us on the cover of the magazine.
Yeah, they did a cover one year with one person in a wheelchair, or an article. I don't think it was a cover. They did an article with one person who was in a wheelchair and one person who was, and I'm putting quotes around this, air quotes with my fingers, old. She's about my age, and this was maybe 5 or 10 years ago that I saw this article.
It was the same person. She was old and had a disability.
No, different person in a wheelchair, but this was just someone who, like I say, they were looking at the aging. And so the pictures, this woman has a beautiful practice and has lovely yoga poses. So that was the whole thing of the yoga. I was like, I want one of my students who's sitting in a wheelchair in an article like that. That's what should be happening, but it's not. So.
Yeah.
Therapy is another kind of a sticky wicket. I think that there are a lot of people who have been trained to do yoga therapy, and I think that's great. I think that there's a lot more medical knowledge that's necessary to do that. I mean, like one simple thing, somebody comes in and says they have sciatica. Okay, that's that when you have that shooting pain from your right in the kind of the center of the hip and the back and down the side of the leg to the little toe. And it may skip a few places, but that's basically the track that it takes. Well, there's 3 different reasons for having that. I mean, 3 different causes. And you have to know how to treat each one. You can't just say, well, this works for it, because it may not work for that type of sciatica you have. So there's a lot of stuff like that I think a therapeutic teacher needs to be really, really well trained. And I don't know what they're going on now as far as the certification of yoga teachers. It's pretty pathetic.
It's very
right now.
Political.
Yeah, and it
costly.
Pay your money and you can get your certification. Your name, you can put this after your name, and so I'm afraid that I've been remiss in paying those things. So I don't have any numbers or letters or anything after my name because I just...
you just have your reputation, which
there you
is
go.
Quite good.
Thank you.
No, I mean, seriously, you were doing it. You were the first one I ever met who was, working with people. So I don't want to ask you, for, research, evidence-based kind of stuff. I mean, there's so much out there about yoga, and people can, sort of Google their condition and yoga and see what, if there have been any studies. But what's your experience, your anecdotal experience with different conditions? I know you worked with people with CP, but since your start there 20 years ago, you've probably been exposed to all kinds of people with different physical and or developmental issues, challenges.
Right. Well, not only have I taught at the CP Center, now Ability Now Bay Area, but I started classes at the Piedmont Yoga Studio, or with the blessing, I guess, of the Piedmont Yoga Studio was this beautiful new building with accessible yoga studio and bathrooms. So it was just amazing. Like I say, that was one of the best, and I will always be grateful for that. So classes have been happening there for the past 10, 12 years now. I don't even remember when it was we moved in, 2000 something. And my stack of props and all the crazy stuff that I have, everyone who's been there at that studio has put up with all my stuff that I have. But I have I've amassed a great deal of props to
and you
help
make
support.
Some of your own. I still have those.
My eye bags.
Yeah, they're nice because they're so light.
Yeah, they're lightweight. I like those. Some people love them, some people don't. But yeah, so that really was very important, having that building. And there are not many other buildings that are accessible, especially around here in the Bay Area and Oakland. They're all old. Mm-hmm. And so accessibility, although if you build a new building, you better have it accessible at this point in time. So anyway, that was how so classes there, then we formed a nonprofit called Piedmont Yoga Community to support those classes. And there are 2 classes, one on Thursday, one on Saturday. I started out with names like special needs and disabilities, and it's like people come to either one, whichever one they feel like coming with. Some people come to both classes. It just, depends. But anyway, that's the Piedmont Yoga Community then also started sponsoring the Clausen House classes. And so that's been really great to have somebody sponsoring that. Our students pay based on a sliding scale. Some of our students pay a huge amount. It's just amazing. They have good jobs, or they have, some kind of funding from somewhere. And then some of our students don't pay a dime when they come in. And I'm really grateful that that's the way it can be. So I don't know how we got off on that topic.
Well, what about specific conditions?
Oh, the conditions.
Someone with MS, for example.
So when I opened those classes at Piedmont Yoga Studio, it was open, and the ones that had preceded it at the downtown place that the CP Center had, we had people with post-polio syndrome. We had a paraplegic, a couple of people with CP, and those people started passing the word out. And then when we moved to Piedmont Yoga Studio, slowly but surely, the class size grew, and other people. So came in with different varying disabilities. So I've had several people with MD. I've had some with osteogenesis imperfecta. I've had some with Parkinson's, paraplegics, quadriplegics, a lot of different things. I mean, just somebody comes in and they say, I've got something and it's something I don't even know anything about. Welcome. Let's see what we can do. And so I don't feel it's really necessary for me to know a lot about somebody's disability, because I teach that person as they are in front of me at the time. And that's what I try to teach my assistants and other teachers to do, is to just be with that person who's there in front of you and teach them yoga, what you can. So yeah, I've worked with a lot of different disabilities at this point in time.
What advice do you have for someone, this podcast, I have no idea who listens to it. I have some data that I check, and it has been listened to in other countries. Not a whole lot of people. It's growing, but in several European countries, China, India, and, throughout the U.S. You have any idea? You had some people at this conference from China and Germany? Were they teachers? And they wanted to know more, take it back to their countries?
One of them, I believe, had a disability, and I don't think the other one did, or at least if she did, it was not visible. Let's put it that way. So books. And, everything is online now, so you can go and you can look at pictures. But there is really nothing to replace a teacher who can look from outside. I mean, I still go to yoga classes. I still want a teacher who can look at me and say, no, move your leg the other way. Turn from inside instead of turning from the outside. So, something, crazy like that. But I think that there is one book specifically that I would recommend, that I've recommended all along, and this is from one of my first teachers, and I mentioned him a while ago. It was Sam Dworkas. He has MS, and he had been diagnosed with that when I did his workshop, his teacher training week down in Florida. And he wasn't announcing it then, but I remembered him saying something at one of the classes that stuck with me, that made me realize that he had just been diagnosed. So he wrote a book called Recovery Yoga, and his name is Sam Dworkas, and you can look him up, and you can still buy that book online. It's one of the best books. It's very slow, and it seems like it's nothing, and it's really powerful. It's like yoga itself. It's and he's got a little bit of the philosophy in it. He reminds you to breathe, and it's a very good book. It's not very big. It's not intimidating. It's got hand-drawn, line-drawn pictures, so there's not somebody, with their foot behind their head or upside down or any of those crazy things. And it's the one book that I really recommend to my students and teachers who are looking at that field, because I think it's really a good book.
Great. So, I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
I do have some book about MS and yoga, like a workbook.
Eric Small wrote a book on that, and he's got, that's a good place for teachers, I think, because he has it in 3 sections: the chair work, the floor work, and standing.
That might be what I have.
And it's a good book, but like I say, I've seen Eric, and he does beautiful poses, and he's sitting in a wheelchair in this one, and I know he spent his time in a wheelchair, so I'm not discounting that, but I'd still love to see some of my students in the poses that they do in a book. But
well, you got to write that book.
I know, don't I?
Well, you've got how many? Well, no, how long have you been doing teacher trainings?
I probably started that about 17 years ago. 18 years ago, something like that. Yeah, because it was right when I realized I needed help. Really good, well-trained teachers to help me with this project. So that was when I started it.
A lot of alumnus, or whatever that plural is.
And they've scattered, to the winds. I'm still in contact with some of them. Like I say, they are across the country, and we still, every now and then, we'll think, oh, I wonder what happened to, so-and-so and where they are now and what they're doing. And then sometimes I hear from them. And I sent out a crazy thing, maybe 5 years ago, to the past attendees. And I said, can you tell me anything about how that teacher training program helped you. And I got an email back from a doctor, and he said, I use that in my practice all the time. And I was like, oh, yes, thank you, because doctors certainly need to be doing that. And I've known there have been several other doctors and nurses who've gone through that program, which is really encouraging too. So
that's great.
Yeah. Oh. And I get people who constantly are telling me my doctor sent me or my PT sent me, and I don't know these doctors or PTs, but if the doctor or PT sent them, yay, that's fantastic. It would be so nice if the medical community and the the rest of us could kind of get together and work together. I think because there's so much capacity for the body to heal itself or for our minds to heal. So
UCSF has a mini medical school program that they teach at a few different campuses in the city, and I went to one. It's like a 6-week session course on pain. And out of those 6 different doctors talking about different modalities, one was, prescription opiates, etc., but all the others were non-drug. I think the vast majority of them at some point during the presentation talked about yoga and meditation. Now, this is the San Francisco area. UCSF's one of the best medical schools in the country. But that was very heartening.
It's heartening, yes. Yeah. It definitely is. I'm certainly not anti-Western medicine by any means. If you need something from a doctor, do it. Don't hesitate. But I also know how much our capacity to heal is within us. And like my knee, like last week, we put this off for a week because I took one step and my knee went one direction and the rest of my leg went another direction. So I was very careful with it for a week. I did actually what I tell my students to do when they do something like that. I was pretty good, which is rest, ice, compress, and elevate, And so I did that. My knee got better, and I knew, I listened to it. I really, really listened to it to make sure I didn't need to go to a doctor, because I was certainly willing to go to my doctor if I felt that there was something in there that was that I was going to make it worse by not listening to a doctor. You break a bone, you want a doctor, but there are other things that we can, once the doctor's done their magic, then it's time for us to do our magic and work on our bodies. And I think yoga has the capacity to teach us how to listen to our bodies. That's what our practice is about, is listening to where we are in the moment and not doing 10 other things at the same time. So
anything else you would want to share?
Well, yeah, there is, on an annual basis, I do this teacher training, and have been for, like I say, it's been at least 16, 17 years that I've done it, probably every year at some point or other. It's how I get a lot of my assistants, because they then intern with me, and maybe I hire them for one of the classes when somebody else, moves away or can't continue for whatever reason. So that's one of the things that I do this for. But the other thing is the Piedmont Yoga Community got a small grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to send me out to do this training wherever. So I've done a training in Sacramento. I did one in Missoula, Montana. I did one in Texas just recently. And I really would like to be able to go out and do this in other places. But it's difficult to find places who are willing to go through the work to put together a class for people with disabilities. A lot of individual teachers that I found in this training, places like Clausen House or the CP Center are the perfect places if you can just find the teachers. And I'm really willing to work to get them trained as a group and as a team, because it takes a team to teach a class like this. I've done it by myself, and it takes a team to be good. That's one of the reasons we have a larger pool of people, but we usually have about 12 people who show up on any one Saturday. And I have usually three or four people who are assisting me. Some, like I say, are just volunteers, but well-trained, and some are paid assistants. So there's always 2 of us. I love putting together a team and watching them work together and see how that comes out. So anyway, I'm certainly willing to travel almost anywhere to find, to help put these kind of classes out there, because I think that it's just something that's so rewarding, not just for the students, but for us as teachers. It's extremely rewarding.
So let's just take a couple moments. Can you give me an idea of what it takes? Because what few things would they need? I mean, obviously to get in touch with you, but to make this happen, you need a studio.
An accessible studio or an accessible place. The CP Center is certainly accessible, but it's not a studio, not a yoga studio, but they have crafted out a small room that is a yoga studio now. It has all of our props in it. Props are pretty important. A lot of yoga studios, especially if they're Iyengar studios, have the props, the bolsters, the blocks, the straps, things like that are used. I have some crazy, I'm a big thrift store person, and so I find all kinds of different sizes of pillows, and that's where those little eye bags came from. I've made my own sandbags. Sandbags are a good thing to have. Blankets, lots of blankets. So a well-equipped yoga studio, and chairs. Chairs are really, really good. I have found that I'm liking this. I don't know how much my students are, but I'm liking starting in a circle and starting with a brief meditation and then doing some work in the chairs and then getting down on the floor and finishing up with whatever we want to do in Shavasana. So once again, it depends on who's there and how they're feeling that day and what their needs are. So that's something that a teacher learns to listen for. So the studio or a place to teach, the props, and then a group of yoga teachers. It has to be people who already know yoga, because there's so many times that you have to back up. I mean, I'm not going to teach a headstand to the first, paraplegic who walks in the door, and yet I have a student who does a beautiful headstand who is a paraplegic, and she can do it pretty much by herself. I have a person with CP who does a lovely headstand, and he loves it when he does a headstand. He says it resets him. Huh. I don't know quite how that works, but it's lovely to see him do it and to see the change in his physical stance and being when he does that. It takes a few teachers or students who have done a lot of yoga and really kind of understand yoga. Some of my best assistants have been not teachers, but just longtime yoga students who have that ability to see a body and pay attention to what's going on and see the needs and listen. Mm-hmm. Listening is really the key. Yeah, that is really the big key, is to be able to listen. So, getting in touch with me as far as the workshops are concerned, I like I say, I'm certainly willing to travel almost anywhere and would love to do it.
That'd be great. You'll have to let me know if someone contacts you.
I will. Definitely will.
Well, thank you so much for coming and just, what you do. It's been wonderful. You've come to the support group several times. You do these, classes. And I came to one of your classes, your trainings. Mm-hmm. That was really amazing. And you're just out there doing this great work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Glass Half Full. Leslie invites you to leave a rating and review on iTunes. This helps spread the word to others dealing with chronic health issues. For show notes, updates, and more, visit the website glasshalffull.online. Glasshalffull.online.